Walk anywhere in Britain and you're literally stepping on history. Lost towns, forgotten people, vanished cultures all lie beneath our feet.
You can imagine what it would have been like 2,000 years ago.
But little by little, they're coming to the surface.
It's the first time this has appeared in 260 years.
Giving us a glimpse of how our ancestors once lived.
Oh, goodness me.
And helping us separate the myths and legends from historical facts.
We're stood beneath the scene of a first-century bloodbath.
I'm Alex Langland.
I've always got time for a bit of digging.
And I'm Raksha Dave.
Oh, look at that!
We're both archaeologists. And in this series, we'll be diving into the past. Coming face to face with the extraordinary.
It is holding a piece of history in your hands, isn't it?
And along the way, we'll be uncovering the secrets that have remained hidden underground for centuries.
I just want them to dig faster. Keep going, troops, keep going.
Lord Nelson, one of Britain's greatest military heroes. The Battle of Trafalgar, his greatest military success.
When he defeated France on the appropriately named HMS Victory, Nelson sealed the Royal Navy's supremacy of the seas. But its success was largely based on another ship, the Invincible, ironically stolen from France itself.
And it was largely thanks to the French, from whom we learnt about organisation, about discipline, and perhaps most importantly of all, about how to design ships.
Sadly, the game-changing Invincible sank when it hit a sandbank here in the Solent in 1758. But by then, the Royal Navy had learnt everything they could from her, and that knowledge was priceless.
Today, I'm joining a marine archaeology team who are excavating this incredible vessel, which has sat at the bottom of the sea for 250 years.
And while they carry out their underwater inspections, I'll be discovering how the Invincible changed the face of the British Navy and the part that it played in the defeat of the country's then greatest enemy, the Emperor Napoleon.
It's 7 a.m. and I'm leaving Portsmouth, bound for the site of the wreck, 3 miles out to sea. And I've just one day to see what treasures this once mighty warship may reveal. Today is the focus of the largest maritime excavation since the Mary Rose 40 years ago. A mammoth 3-year project costing an incredible £2 million. But for a ship that's transformed the British Navy, no expense is spared.
Yeah.
That wasn't very dignified, now was it?
Everything's being coordinated from this floating command centre, the MV Avon, which is where I'm meeting the lead marine archaeologist, Dan Pascoe.
So, hi Raksha, welcome aboard the Avon.
Well, I'm so glad to be on semi-permanent ground, that's for sure. So what about your project? What have you been up to?
Well, here we are over the site of Invincible. We're in the eastern Solent, and the Avon is moored exactly over the wreck site. And this is we're above a sandbank here. That's what Invincible hit in 1758.
Dan and his team are up against it. Both the sandbank and seabed are shifting. So every moment the wreck's left in the water, it's in danger of being destroyed and lost forever. Over the last 3 years, they've completed more than 1,000 dives, which means more than 1,000 changes into these things.
It is all a bit of a faff, this, but the water, although it looks quite nice, it is pretty cold down there. And we've got these dry suits to keep us dry, or that's what they're meant to do. When you're working, it doesn't always work out that way. It sort of leaks in through the neck and through the...
I see you've got your thermal onesie on as well.
Yeah, you definitely need that.
The cold temperatures and lack of oxygen means kitting up correctly can be the difference between life and death. Final checks complete, Dan heads into the water. not your normal excavation. But then Invincible was no normal ship. The pride of the British Navy began life as a French vessel. To find out how she changed sides, we need to go back more than 270 years.
May the 14th, 1747. And a convoy of French ships comes under attack from the British fleet off the northwest coast of Spain. It's one of many such battles during that period. I'm off to the Greenwich Maritime Archives to find out more about just what made this battle so significant.
So this is by Samuel Scott, and it's showing the Battle of Cape Finisterre. It's got a low perspective. You are looking down into the battle. You've got an admiral's eye
Of course.
of what's happening. So you're right in the thick of it, amongst the shot and the smoke of the battle.
And what do we know about the battle itself then on the day?
Well, the battle is part of the War of the Austrian Succession, so one of these endless wars against France that Britain is fighting in the 18th century. You've got a British squadron of 14 warships encountering a French warship fleet. But it is a pretty bloody and desperate 7-hour battle. The British have the upper hand, and they are able to resoundingly defeat the French Navy. The French lose some important ships, and of course one of the ones that's captured is the French ship Invincible, which actually proves to be quite important.
In fact, important is an understatement. L'Invincible was a cutting-edge vessel, which 3 years earlier had lived up to her name by fighting off 3 British ships entirely on her own. But now she was firmly in the Royal Navy's possession.
So this is the captured vessel Invincible then?
Yes.
How long was it before the British realised that this was a sort of design classic?
Pretty quickly. Once you've seen beyond the damage of shot and the fire of battle, they realised that underneath was a structure that they could really work with. You can see that the Invincible is a well-armed 2-decker warship carrying 74 guns, but it's also slightly larger than British ships, so it's able to mount heavier guns, so it actually packs a much greater punch than the equivalent British warship. And essentially, it goes into production.
It's like irony, isn't it, that actually all of those naval victories that we have of the 18th and early 19th centuries in many ways are underpinned by French technology.
French technology, yes, but British tactics.
Right.
Having captured L'Invincible, the British incorporated her into the fleet and changed her name to HMS Invincible. Imaginative, eh? And although she sank 11 years later, no ship, before or since, has been as influential.
When she hit that sandbank back in 1758, she stayed upright for almost 3 days, giving her 700 crew time to escape and be rescued. But when she finally went down, thousands of objects from huge cannon to the smallest bolts went with her. Slowly, Dan and his team have been bringing them back to the surface. And then here to ensure they're preserved for future generations to see.
So here we are at the Conservation Unit. We've recovered nearly 4,000 objects, ranging from really large objects like these to much smaller artefacts, such as these rigging blocks.
But you've got a bit of a battle on your hands, haven't you? Because that sandbank is continually moving. Why is that an issue for you?
Well, when the sand moves away, it starts exposing the wreck more. And those artefacts that have been exposed to the biological and physical environment that start to deteriorate.
To prevent that deterioration, the team store the artefacts in freshwater tanks. The importance of removing the salt water quickly is easy to see.
If I take out this parrel bead, part of the rigging,
Gosh, that is beautiful.
you can see all of the grain of the wood, perfect shape.
There's something very satisfying about this. It's just really smooth and beautiful. It looks like as though somebody turned it just yesterday.
Exactly. Now, if I show you the same type of object This has been exposed for a short period of time, a matter of weeks.
Look at that.
And you can see the whole surface has been eaten away.
How long would it have taken for this to turn into that?
Infestation happens within weeks. Then, within a couple of months, the object is gone.
So it's literally a race against time. And you could just lose the Invincible forever.
Absolutely.
Next, I get the first glimpse of this extraordinary ship underwater.
And I discover what daily life would have been like for those sailors on board Invincible.
Here we have the infamous Cat of Nine Tails. Jeremiah Walsh died after being whipped 72 times.
Three miles out to sea from Portsmouth, an archaeological team are in their third and final season, salvaging the remains of one of the Royal Navy's most important ever ships, HMS Invincible. It's not the sort of excavation I'm used to.
It's just about to go in. Oh, there he goes. Just like that.
2 hours into my visit, and the search goes on for more artefacts. The divers use a guide rope to get them down to the wreck. Eventually, the ship is revealed, and it's enough to take your breath away. The Invincible was 52 metres long, and its remains are now spread over an area roughly equivalent to half a football field. The ship's so well preserved, you can almost picture the sailors walking along these planks. But not all the artefacts being recovered are so immediately clear and obvious. Back above water, I'm getting to see a few of them close up.
It just looks like as though you're showing me piles of twigs and bits of string.
Well, I'll try and convince you that this is an important assemblage of artefacts. We have a mop, or the head of a mop. We have the head of the broom. It's like a little witch's broom known as a bosom brush. But we also have this wooden stave bucket. This group came from the same area, which we're calling the broom cupboard.
You've sold this to me now. I can totally see that.
I mean, these are essential domestic items on board the ship. You know, it was necessary to keep things clean and tidy.
The thing that I love about it is that all of these items are extremely evocative, aren't they? They just give you that real sense of what it was like to work on the Invincible.
The Invincible was renowned for its organisation, and these objects certainly suggest that everything on board was shipshape. But what about the sailors on board? What was life like for them?
The answer lies in places like this. Polperro in Cornwall. Back in the 18th century, this was a seafaring centre with its own harbour. Many naval volunteers would have come from here and other coastal towns just like it.
Those who signed up voluntarily to the British Navy did so on a temporary basis. It was a time of what you might call zero-hour contracts. You were hired when you were needed and then simply cast off when you were no longer required.
This is naval historian Joe Ezra. If anyone knows what onboard conditions were like for those sailors, it's her.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Alex.
What a lovely spot you've chosen here.
Yes.
What do we know about sort of day-to-day life on the actual ships themselves?
Very structured. Sailors would go on watch from noon till noon, and that would be an 8-hour watch. They would have an hour for breakfast, for lunch, and for dinner.
Yeah.
They would have 4 hours of drill or exercise time or maintaining the ship itself. 5 hours of recreation and leisure.
Right.
And 4 hours sleep.
What do we know about their diet?
Rations were quite basic. So food preservation and storage was a major problem at this time, of course. So lots of salted food. So salted meat, for example, salt beef. And also ship's biscuits made from flour, water and salt.
So more salt.
More salt.
It does make me wonder why people would have wanted then to sign up to the Navy.
Sense of adventure. Certainly, you know, people got to travel.
Though many did join up for life on the ocean waves, not all were willing participants. Bands of so-called press gangers would roam the country, forcing people to join against their will. And the Navy had other recruitment tricks too.
If I just hand you this,
Yeah.
and you've just taken the King's Shilling, congratulations, you have now joined the Navy.
I've heard of this. So now, having been given the King's Shilling, now that's it. I'm a Navy boy.
There's stories that come out about men drunkards in taverns being bought drinks with the King's Shilling,
Yeah.
and ending up having to join the Navy because they've accepted the King's Shilling.
And that would be it then, off to join the Navy. And for how long?
However long the Navy wanted you.
With an often unwilling group of sailors on board, you can understand why the Navy had a strict set of rules, rigorously enforced. And if you did step out of line, well, you were a braver man than me.
Here we have the infamous Cat of Nine Tails.
Pretty ominous looking, that.
It's quite sinister looking, isn't it, when you see it? Of course, this is a replica because they would be thrown overboard ship afterwards, after the punishment had been meted out. The person who was on the receiving end of this would be whipped in front of the crew. Up to 12 lashes was quite usual, but of course sometimes people were lashed more than that. A chap called Jeremiah Walsh died after being whipped 72 times. So
72 times. So this ultimately is the weapon then that whipped the Royal Navy into shape.
indeed it is, Alex.
It's shocking to think of how terrible things could be for the sailors. But we can't deny the fact that it worked. One British naval officer put it better than I ever could when he wrote in 1812 that each task has its man, and each man his place. A ship contains a set of human machinery in which every man is a wheel, a band or a crank, all moving with wonderful regularity and precision to the will of its machinist, the all-powerful captain.
But the human machines that made up the Royal Navy were only as good as the technology of the vessel they sailed in. And that's where the cutting-edge Invincible shone. The engineering of her sails and rigging was mind-boggling. And from the depths of the ocean, the team recently uncovered the enormous rope that would have run along the main mast. Known as the mainstay, it has a diameter of 18 inches. This huge rope is now safe and sound in its temporary home back at the Conservation Lab.
This is the ship's mainstay. It looks like a giant anaconda.
It's like as though
on
you've
the
raised a
surface.
massive sea beast from the water.
It was like raising a massive sea beast.
These are huge,
These are
aren't they?
huge.
How many people would have had to carry one bit of rope?
If I just give you an example, it took over 400 men to raise the anchor. Behind us, we've got this very smelly couple of tanks. So this is the rope that would have supported the masts of the ship.
And all those sails and all the rigging at the top of the ship.
That's it.
I like my smelly archaeology. This is like scratch and sniff to another level, isn't it?
This is the best bit about it. This is what takes you back in time, because you know this smell hasn't changed for 260 years. And what you're smelling there is the pitch, the tar. That's what protects, it's the weathering, protects it against the elements.
So it's like waterproofing, essentially.
Exactly.
The Royal Navy's demand for rope was almost endless. There were 23.5 miles of it on HMS Invincible alone. To ensure supply, the Navy had 4 roperies, one of which survives to this day at the Chatham Historic Dockyard in Kent.
Here we are.
Oh, goodness me. Look at that. It's incredible to think that Invincible was to have such a remarkable impact upon the Navy, but in many ways you see that impact here, the sheer volumes of rope that we're having to produce to make boats like Invincible.
It's a huge amount. So you imagine the amount they would be having to produce for not one, but sort of 10, 12 ships at a time. They needed a building of the shape and size.
On average, then, how much rope are they making here a day?
Well, one example is the 76mm cable rope, which is kind of about that big. It's a real big rope. 1768, the records show that they'd make around a mile of that a day.
Per day? Mm-hmm. Goodness me.
Yeah.
As rope consisted of natural fibres, it had to be protected from the weather. Hence, this incredible building. At its height, 2,000 men, women and children worked in here. And if they were around today, they'd recognise the production methods.
The way rope's made is still exactly the same as it was 400 odd years ago. The raw material, which is the yarn, arrives in cops, and that's fed through the boards right at the far end of the building. Those are then formed into the 3 strands, which you can see there on the pegboards.
Yeah.
At the far end of the rope walk, the machine then pulls it taut and it becomes plaited and it forms into the rope.
I mean, I do have to say, this is probably one of my most favourite indoor spaces of all time, given that I can actually barely make out the end of this building.
It does look like an optical illusion. It's very long. It's 1/4 of a mile long, and it's the longest covered rope walk in Europe, which is why we have bicycles to get from one end to the other.
Coming up, I come face to face with the legendary hardware that ensured Invincible lived up to its name.
It is holding a piece of history in your hands, isn't it?
And I experience a real blast from the past.
Fire the gun! Oh, goodness me.
The Solent. More than 20 feet under this section of the channel, maritime archaeologists are working to excavate, record and preserve the remains of HMS Invincible, an 18th century warship captured from the French, which later helped transform the Royal Navy. I'm spending a day with the team on their quest, and 4 hours into my stay, the team have identified a piece of equipment that once formed part of a cannon. They pack it into a crate with other finds from the site and use seaweed to stop it rolling around. Now it's time for its journey to the surface. And the man behind the diving mask, Kevin Stratford, to show it off.
So this is the rammer head, which is used to push the shot and the wadding down the barrel of the guns. Obviously, it's been eaten a bit by the gripple, as you can see. You can handle this one.
Lift this up. Oh, look at that. It's actually, it's like, it is holding a piece of history in your hands, isn't it?
It is.
Absolutely phenomenal.
This rammer head would have had a wooden pole or a sturdy piece of rope fed through it.
So you've got a fragment of something else here?
So this is a powder ladle. Actually, the ladle itself is quite unique. We haven't had one of these yet. It's obviously composite with metal and wood, and it would have been used to transfer powder into the cannon. The section in my right hand is obviously the handle end, where it's strengthened, and you've got some wood going into it. That would have also had a short wooden handle on the end, and then you've got the ladle section here, which would have scooped up the powder.
Well, I'm imagining that must have been quite heavy to handle.
I would have thought so, yeah.
So you always forget, don't you, like how physical battle can be. And you can just imagine somebody running around the ship with this ladle, just charging and shoving all of the gunpowder into the gun. Pretty fantastic.
This is just the latest evidence of the artillery on board Invincible. She was a firepower-packed machine decked out with 74 cannons. Although now waterlogged and rusty, the weapons on board would once have instilled fear into Britain's enemies. They ranged from anti-personnel swivel guns to awesome 32-pounders deployed in the fiercest of battles.
So, what sort of destruction could a 32-pound gun cause? To find out, I'm visiting Pendennis Castle in Falmouth, where naval historian Paul Pattinson still has examples of the real thing.
That is a 1-pound ball. Imagine that, 32 times the size of that, 6 inches in diameter, so not quite as big as a football, smashing into the side of a ship at 450 miles an hour.
450 miles an hour.
And that sends splinters of timber everywhere.
Yeah.
If you're standing behind that, and those splinters are great shards of oak going all over the place, it's going to be chaos.
Yeah.
Plus the impact of anything in the way of that ball. You know, it's gone.
Be completely
It's gone.
obliterated.
Absolutely, yeah. And then it's going to bounce around as well before it finally comes to a rest.
Absolute hell on water, isn't it?
Fighting and naval action at close quarters in the 18th century, it's really nasty.
The cannons, like this 24-pounder, were made from solid cast iron before having their barrels drilled out. Everything had to be precise, otherwise they could spectacularly fail or even explode. Loading them was not for the faint-hearted, back then or now.
OK, so Paul, what's Ian doing then here?
Right, well, he's going to load the gun by first putting in some powder.
Gun Captain Ian's using a powder ladle, just like the one we saw being recovered from Invincible.
And he just places that down the barrel and puts it all the way to the back of the gun.
We'll now put a wad in.
When he rams the charge home, the wad helps to keep it in there tight. So he's doing that now. Now, this is the priming wire.
Yeah.
So he's pushing that down through to make sure that the vent is clear.
Yeah.
What he's now going to do is put some fine powder down that vent, which links to the main charge.
Super fine gunpowder.
Hurry up, Ian, the French are coming.
The Royal Navy's cannons weren't unique, but their firing teams were. They were disciplined, organised, and deadly accurate.
OK, stand by. Cover your vent. Fire the gun.
Oh, goodness me. So, Paul, on a 74-gun warship, those things going off regularly, I mean, what are we talking, every 90 seconds?
There isn't a massive amount of data on how quickly they fired.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's kind of one shot every 2 minutes. But you can't do that for a long time because these things are really heavy.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to manhandle them backwards and forwards. You're exhausted really quickly.
How long would you be going for in a battle?
You could be firing for half an hour, say.
Goodness me.
You know, half an hour is a long time to handle something like this over and over.
And now, having done it just once...
Fire the gun!
I think I know what he means.
It's been 5 hours since I joined the team, and back on the MV Avon, they're preparing to dive again. Beneath the surface, they soon start identifying more incredible artifacts from Invincible that have lain undisturbed for 2.5 centuries. Over in the conservation lab, their colleagues are working to conserve other items that have already been retrieved from the site. For project leader Dan, one is especially important.
Here we go, Ratcha. I think you're going to like this.
And look at that!
This is a complete bottle with its stopper.
It's a beauty. I'm absolutely astonished that this has managed to survive this long.
I know, 260 years underwater. It survived the wrecking. It survived the breakup. We found it outside the wreck. So it's fallen out and it's still survived.
So don't drop it now.
Don't drop it now.
Don't drop it now. Was actually inside this then?
There are a couple of possibilities. It could be wine, it could be rum.
The different contents would suggest the different ranks within the ship though, wouldn't it? So if it was wine and fortified wine, you'd be looking more at the officers.
Definitely. If it was rum, the crew may be getting their tot of rum a day from something like this.
I'd love to find out what was inside there.
I guess the only way of finding out is by popping the cork. You're going to have to be very brave if you want to test it.
I'd give it a go if you would.
Well, after you.
Hard liquor mixed with heavy weaponry. It definitely sounds like a potentially explosive cocktail. But we're talking about a time when Britain was awash with rum, shipped in from its colonies in the Caribbean, and then bottled in port cities like London and Bristol.
Rum was also at the heart of the Royal Navy and of just about everybody on board her ships. From 1655, each sailor was given a daily rum ration, a tradition that was to continue right up until 1970.
In the beginning, every sailor was given half a pint a day. But there were plenty of other boozy drinks the Navy could have plied sailors with.
Hello there, Helen. God, lovely day.
It's beautiful. Lovely day. We're sitting on a cliff.
Yes.
Looking at some rum. The sailors were normally given beer, because beer was better than brackish water. The problem was, in that heat, beer didn't keep well at all, so rum became the alternative. It was very popular.
I can imagine.
The second thing that they needed to guard against was scurvy.
Right, of course.
And
that comes about through a lack of vitamin C, isn't it?
That's right.
So what did the Navy do then to address these issues of the disease of scurvy and people being essentially drunk by about, I should imagine, midday?
They came up with this particular recipe for grog.
Grog. OK, so that phrase we have when you wake up in the morning and you feel a bit groggy.
Yes.
Basically, it
comes from the Navy grog.
Right, the Navy term grog.
This is the cocktail. It's 1 of sour, 2 of sweet, 3 of strong, and 4 of weak.
So 1 of sour, yeah?
Yep.
Nice lot of vitamin C here. 2 of sweet, yeah. In that goes then. Now, the demon rum.
The proper stuff.
3 of strong, in it goes. And 4 of weak, water. It's a good stir, isn't it? There we go. It's your morning 10 o'clock measure.
This is my, yes.
There we go. Here's to the Royal Navy.
That's actually possible, isn't it?
That's rather nice, actually.
I can see why they enjoyed that.
I can.
As well as dispensing rum to its sailors, the Royal Navy was responsible for stopping smugglers bringing it into the country without paying the proper tax. The coves of Cornwall were the smugglers' ports of choice. They'd make trackways like this one at Llansalos to help haul their contraband ashore.
Well, that is quite something.
It is, isn't it? It's incredibly deep and also well hidden. That's the other thing.
It is. It's a beautifully concealed path. But what's really catching my eye here, Helen, are these cart ruts.
These here?
Look at this.
I know.
Look at that. I mean, it doesn't get clearer than that, does it? That cart rut there. There we are. Look at that. That's wonderful.
Yes, if you consider the number of metal wheels that have been carrying heavy loads, and let's face it, these liquids are heavy.
Yeah.
And large volumes are coming in here. That's what's quite obvious.
Yes,
This
yeah.
isn't the occasional barrel.
Yeah.
These are significant volumes coming through here. Along these coasts, you have men who are putting up the money to buy the goods in the Channel Islands. They have the vessels, they go across, they bring the barrels in. You then need to have the manpower to haul it off the beach and then distribute it. The Navy is fighting so many wars, it doesn't have the time to help control smuggling. The customs and revenue men are underfunded, under-resourced, so they don't have the manpower to really control it. It's big business.
But the tide was turning against the smugglers, and Invincible was one of the main reasons. By replicating her design, the Navy was winning more and more battles against its foreign enemies, giving it more time to deal with the enemy on its own shores. By the start of the 19th century, this once thriving illegal rum trade was dead. Britannia ruled the waves, at home as well as abroad.
Coming up, as the excavation nears its end, the team make their most extraordinary find yet.
It's the first time this has appeared in 260 years.
And exploring Invincible's legacy, I go aboard the ship that secured Britain's supremacy at sea.
The excavation of HMS Invincible, sunk after hitting a sandbank 2.5 centuries ago, is nearing its climax. A team of marine archaeologists have recovered sections of the ship itself, as well as an array of fascinating artifacts from on board. I've been here for a day, crossing my fingers for a big find, and it looks like the team may have uncovered something extraordinary. A gun port lid, the door which would be open to allow the cannons to fire on the enemy. After carefully cleaning away all the sand and seaweed, they're now attempting to lift it to the surface.
It's really exciting. It's a bit like watching real-life action Mary Rose. absolutely incredible. It's the first time this has appeared in 260 years.
With the gun port lid safely on deck and Dan out of the water, we finally get a chance to examine it.
This is very exciting. So when you say gun lid, we've got all of these cannons that surround the whole ship, don't we?
That's it.
And I like to call them the little flappy windows. So it's like one of those little flappy windows, isn't it?
Exactly.
Okay.
So when you want to run the guns out to fire, you open the gun ports. So what we're looking at here is the inside of the gun lid. So it's made up of 2 layers of planking, and this top layer is fastened to the bottom layer by these iron studs.
Oh, right, so that's what these like knobbly bits are then on top.
Exactly.
When Invincible arrived into Portsmouth after she was first captured, every inch of her was measured by the Navy. So now, by noting the size of the gun port, we should be able to work out the actual position this lid occupied on the ship.
So if we do it in inches, because in those days all the measurements were in feet and inches.
There's no metric.
There's no metric. So very rough. So we've got 28 inches there. So if we grab the document from 1747 that Felix here has, this should give us the clue straight away. On the left-hand side here, you can see it says Invincible, gun, deck, upper deck, quarter deck, and forecastle. So let's go straight to fore and aft measurement. We have 2 feet 2 inches or 2 feet 3 inches. We've got 2 feet 4 inches, but that doesn't matter because Invincible had a refit in the 1750s and the upper works were likely to have been changed and altered. So I think we can safely say that this is a gun lid, probably from, I would say, the quarter deck.
This gun port lid would have been here, high up in the Invincible's stern. It would have been swung open to allow a small 9-pound cannon to poke through. After more than 260 years on the seabed, it's a remarkable survivor.
So this is a pretty unique find then?
This is, and there's quite a few on Invincible, but this is one of my favourites. We've never had a gun lid before.
This is your star find.
It is for today anyway. We have a star find every day, but I would say this is the star find from today, being biased.
The raising of a gun port lid and the muzzle of a cannon being pushed out was a decisive moment in naval battles, signalling the start of the actual hostilities. The Royal Navy took part in hundreds throughout the 18th century, but I've come to Portsmouth to find out how influential Invincible was during the most famous one of all, on October the 21st, 1805.
Early that morning, sailors under the command of Admiral Horatio Nelson prepared to do battle off the coast of Spain. Much had changed since the sinking of the Invincible some 58 years earlier. The men were better trained, better regulated, and the British fleet was comprised of vessels which drew on Invincible's design. Leading the charge, however, was this ship, Admiral Lord Nelson's flagship, HMS Victory.
And although she had an extra deck and 30 more guns, she too owed much to her illustrious predecessor.
By the time we get to the Battle of Trafalgar, Invincible's been lying at the bottom of the Solent for a number of decades. Is its influence being felt, though?
Absolutely. That inspiration really becomes the backbone for the Royal Navy. And when you look at the Royal Navy fleet at Trafalgar, more than half of them are 74-gun ships. They trace their lineage right back to the capture of Invincible. They owe their design to that event.
And their design, on-board organisation, plus Nelson's tactics all led to the historic defeat of the larger combined French and Spanish fleets.
What actually happened at Trafalgar?
At Trafalgar, you get this clash of 2 enormous fleets, the Royal Navy and the combined fleets of France and Spain, and you end up with the finest, the greatest, the most decisive victory obtained by the Royal Navy in the Age of Sail.
Do we know how many cannonballs this ship was loosing off them?
Victory's a 104-gun ship, so when you discharge a broadside, you have 52 guns if you're fighting on both sides, which they were for that first push. Yeah. That's 104, and you can double and triple shot these guns.
Goodness me.
So incredibly destructive power. At less than point-blank range, people within spitting distance.
So if the French and the Spanish Navy have got numerical superiority, what is it that really gave the British Navy the edge?
The British Navy has the superiority in quality.
Right.
So the ships by this point are better. They are better built. They are more strongly built. The crews are better trained. They are better fed. They are better sailors. They are better gunners. And really, the Royal Navy, by this point, is used to winning.
Nelson's victory at Trafalgar came at the ultimate personal price. Whilst on deck, he was shot and killed by an enemy sniper. The battle proved to be a serious reverse for the French leader, Napoleon Bonaparte. A decade later, when Napoleon surrendered after his defeat at Waterloo, he did so on HMS Bellerophon, a vessel identical to Invincible, the ship that once belonged to France. For that country's greatest general, it must have been the cruelest irony of all.
Beneath the Solent, the monumental task of excavating the remains of HMS Invincible is nearing its end. And my time with the ship is nearly over as well. The area the team are working is 50 metres long and 10 metres wide, and that's only half the ship. Over the last 3 years, Dan Pesco and his team have been using a new archaeological technique to record what's left of the vessel under the shifting sands, and the results are in.
Well, let's take a closer look at these 3D images. This is the bow of Invincible.
Unbelievable. Look at that. Look at that. You can actually see all the decks.
This deck had all of the spare rope coiled up on the deck. And you can even see the nails that fasten in the planks.
This incredible model was created by taking hundreds of interconnecting images and then stitching them together to generate one 3D picture.
It's just like looking through a slice of time, isn't it?
It's the best way we can allow people to travel back to 1758.
Thanks to these models, it's now possible to explore the ship like never before. Here's the broom cupboard where the mop and bucket was found. This is the deck where the rope was discovered. And these models allow us to do something even more amazing. To get our first glimpse in 260 years of the structure of the ship, which transformed the Royal Navy. For the project team, there's one last job. Recording as much of the ship as possible before covering her with sandbags to protect her from the harsh tides. We don't know if archaeologists will ever dive the wreck site again. But this team has transformed our understanding of the ship and the 18th century Navy.
So, Dan, you spent 3 years excavating on this site. What are the highlights?
Well, there's been so many during those 3 years. But the best thing about Invincible is just how well preserved it is. And everything on Invincible is massive. The ship, the equipment, all the ropes, it's amazing. And hopefully we can, all these recoveries be on display in the museum soon so everyone can see it.
I love it. Invincible, a ship on steroids.
Unfortunately, not that invincible, though.
I know.
What a fantastic underwater window into our rich naval history. You must feel really privileged to have got so up close and so personal with that vessel.
Oh, Alex, it was an unforgettable experience. It was quite otherworldly, actually, but just seeing the bits of the vessel coming up, knowing that that was such an influence on the modern Navy it is today, the design, the technology, the organisation. A bit like how I like to run my excavations, actually.
I'm sure, I'm sure. And, the whole empire is all quite problematic and everything, but it's probably safe to say that in that age of sail, when Britain did dominate the waves, that much of that technology did stem from this one boat, didn't it?
A boat that was stolen from the French. Who would have thought it?
To think we owe it all to the French.
More digging next Saturday night at 7. Sticking with maritime marvels, the new series of How the Victorians Built Britain continues at 9. Before that, on Channel 5, the Victorians' ruthless ambition meant huge sacrifices for the working classes. New Tony Robinson's History of Britain continues next.